And right back to it. Hazards of the process. Well, what are the chemicals that are a potential hazard? And it's not just the chemicals that require the PSM. There's something that throws you into the realm of PSM, but it's kind of a waste to think of this in an isolation. All right, the only thing that's going to push our company over the threshold of PSM is anhydrous ammonia. So we're not going to worry about the chlorine, and we're not going to worry about the diesel fuel because it's only for filling vehicles and the chlorine doesn't reach threshold quantities. No, you still are thinking about those things in an overall safety plan. It's all packaged. But what are the chemicals on your site? What are the other things that might be hazardous? What is the process chemistry if you are running actual chemical processes, your pharmaceutical, your oil refinery, or other industry that creates chemical processes? What are the quantities, etc.? What about toxicity information? You need to keep your safety data sheets. In the old days, it was material safety data sheets, MSDS. But now the material has been dropped. It's just safety data sheets. But you need your binder handy. And you should have a copy of that available to employees. You should have a copy that's easily accessible, not in a hazardous area. So if there is a disaster, you can get your hands on a copy of your MSDS or SDS binder and provide that to emergency responders. Doesn't do you any good if it's right next to the location that's most likely to be involved in a release. So, well, we've got an SDS binder, but we can't get to it because it's in the most toxic area in the building. So you need these resources easily accessible. So what is the process technology? We do have a lot of oil refineries and biotechnology and pharmaceuticals and other things that occur in California, but around here it's mostly anhydrous ammonia cooling as one of the biggest, but not the only hazard. So here is just a sample of a process diagram that can be useful not only in your PSM and RMP to illustrate what you're doing without really releasing trade secret information. That kind of detail doesn't have to be here, but certainly the overall process, the hazard steps, the chemicals that are available, and then a site map that would show where all of these different things are that could help emergency responders. You need to have detailed lists of your equipment, maintenance, capacities, and all kinds of details. Mechanical integrity, you might have certification for different types of machines that show they've been inspected and certified or authorized for use. And so you have to have inspectors come by periodically and check your refrigeration systems, check your holding tanks for chemicals, things of that sort. Process hazard analysis. This is going through, this is something that refrigeration you don't have to worry about because you don't have to go through and talk about what are the hazards of refrigeration. The hazard is a release, period, of anhydrous ammonia. The release is the hazard. And so you look at the facility layout, there's no surprise. If there's a release, you got a problem. But other types of facilities where you do have oil refineries and pharmaceutical production and things like that, you might have very hazardous chemicals being manufactured along the way. And so the process needs to be analyzed in a lot of detail to understand at which points do you have the potential for a hazard situation. So again, lots and lots of detail in PSM. One of the concerns with some companies are the trade secrets. How do you create a PSM without releasing trade secrets in a public document, because your PSM RMP documents, you're losing control over. You have to provide that to the county or state or federal agency that oversees your operation. And so you need to make sure you understand, how do we keep all of our safety information in a way that makes sense without releasing trade secrets that make us more competitive than our competitors. Management of change. Again, things are always changing. Replacement in kind does not really cause any change. So I've got one piece of equipment and it's getting old, so I'm going to take it out and put something almost identical. You don't have to do any change management because nothing changed. You just put in a new one. But if it's an updated, different one, it operates a little differently. Now you've got a different process. Maybe you added a new building, maybe you added a new chemical, maybe, lots of things change. And so how do you make sure that those changes are properly reflected in your training, in your documentation, in your reporting of your RMP and PSM? And what we haven't talked about here, there's something called a BMP, Business Management Plan, which is very, very much involved in this. It can be part of all of this. Anyway, don't worry about, I think I talked about that earlier, a business management plan or emergency response plan. Anyway, operating procedures, all of these things, standard operating procedures. If you don't know SOP, you should. SOPs are standard operating procedures. And again, I don't want to just read all of these slides to you, but pause and read these things. They are, I think, good things just to have been exposed to. Safe work practices. Again, this is very important components to your trainings. Trainings must cover all of the safety issues and what to do if there is any kind of an emergency, and how will that emergency be disseminated? How will you be notified? So there might be some emergency horn. You hear the horn, you go to a location where employees are supposed to congregate so that you can make sure you count employees, who was on site when this started, who do we know is here, who's missing. So that helps emergency response people to know if there might be somebody still inside that needs some rescuing. Contractors, again, they need to be safe when they come on your site, even though they're not your employees. If they come onto your facility property, they are now in the quote danger zone with the chemicals and the processes that occur on your site. They've entered your site, they need the proper training, they need the proper knowledge of your PSM and RMP. Your emergency action plans. This has gone under different names. I just mentioned the business response plan. Used to be a risk emergency response plan, or a business response plan, emergency action plan. There are a number of different names for these, but they must have releases or provisions for releases of small hazardous materials. So what happens if there's a minor release? It's not a significant hazard, but it could be a local issue to maybe small number of employees, but it certainly isn't something that is involving the community. What do you do? Training for the alarms, all of these things. You need to make sure that your emergency action plan, what do you do when there's an emergency, is very well detailed and includes not only small events that are a small piece of the site, larger events that are also reserved to on-site location problems or something that starts to affect past your property boundary and becomes part of a community problem. Then incident investigations. Certainly there are notifications that must happen way faster than 48 hours. You have to notify emergency personnel immediately, and there are proper rules for that. That has to be in your plan. But once you do your immediate notifications, the investigation, you have 48 hours to start that process. And then you have to develop a report that is filed to show what exactly happened. There are audits to make sure that you're in compliance, that your PSM is effective and properly trained, and it has to be certified every 3 years. Trade secrets. Employers must make all necessary information required to comply with PSM regardless of trade secrets. But there are ways around that where you can keep certain trade secret information. And this is where there's been some arguments and wrangling between industry and regulators, but there are ways to deal with it. I'll just leave it at that. There are confidentiality agreements that can be allowed. So if there are certain things that would be considered a trade secret that you have to release because it is also considered a safety issue or involved in your process safety, then you can have a confidentiality agreement with the regulatory agency so that that cannot be released to the general public. You can read the case study. I'm not going to go through that. Severe violator enforcement program. So again, there is a program for severe violators. A lot of people think that this program has been somewhat ineffective, that large companies have basically laughed at it, haven't followed it. So what if they fine me a little bit? If they fine us $5 million, but by ignoring them, we're saving, $5 million every 6 months. It doesn't make a lot of sense to worry about the $5 million fine if you're saving a lot of money by operating in an unsafe manner. Anyway, I won't get into that. Don't need about typical citations. But there's a lot of examples here of the types of citations given, and these, I believe, are Monterey County or Central Coast, not federal, but I'm not sure where those numbers came from. I know where the PowerPoint came from. The PowerPoint came from a local individual, but I don't know the numbers that she's quoting here. But the severe violator enforcement program is definitely supposed to be putting pressure on industry to follow the rules. OSHA is serious about compliance and enforcement of PSM. Yes, they are. Yes, they do follow the regulations, but because of the way the regulations are set up, sometimes industry doesn't necessarily take it as seriously as OSHA would like them to. The EPA risk management plan basics. Many times companies who must comply with PSM must also comply with the requirements of the EPA's RMP, or risk management plans. The RMP standard was to be a mirror of the PSM standard, one facing in, one facing out, making it much easier. That didn't happen that way. PSM looking inward, protecting the site, the workers, the contractors, your location. RMP protecting the community. So you need to have a basic executive summary and all of the details in your risk management plan. All of the large coolers around here have one. It'll have maps like this that show general wind directions, where the most at-risk regions are, and if they contain housing, schools, and other types of facilities in the community, that would be a public hazard that needs to be aware of. So PSM is comprehensive. It's a difficult standard. There's a lot to it. It started in 91, but has gone through some changes, and there have been continuing problems. It's not like it fixed everything. Made things better, but it hasn't gotten rid of some of these major disasters. So there are some facilities or assistance available. The PSM checklist, I don't know if that's still online. Chemical Safety Board, the OSHA website, I'm sure those haven't moved anywhere. But you can certainly look at a PSM checklist. I'm sure that's floating around, even if the Georgia Tech facility doesn't have that active at the moment. More information. Oh, wait a minute, this was not, I take that back. This was from Michelle Dunham, Georgia Tech, who it was not from the local person. So those numbers that we got were OSHA numbers. That's right, those were OSHA numbers, not Central Coast California numbers for the citations. Kind of irrelevant, you don't have to memorize those numbers anyway. And we do have oil refineries in South County. We have for oil facilities that fall under this as well. We don't do refining in the county, but we certainly do a lot of oil drilling. So that's it for this one.